In this video, I will be discussing the lower rated books that I read in the month of January. I haven't done a reading wrap up since the month of November, so I feel like I'm struggling to get started with this. None of these books were horrible. I didn't really hate any of them. I will have a separate video coming out discussing my favorite books I read in January. This is probably my least favorite book of all of the ones I read last month. That book is What Mother Won't Tell Me by 𝙲𝙾𝙽𝙃𝙷. You know what though? This is something that I talked about in my reading goals video that I said I don't want to do anymore, and I straight up went and did it with this book. Where so many of the books I read last year were new releases that I borrowed from my library, and I hadn't heard anything about them. I didn't even really know what they were about. I'm trying not to do that so much this year now. I want to read more backlist books. I want to read books that I've heard good things about. I don't know. I feel like I could have saved myself the time with this one because I did not enjoy this one. I don't think it was worth my time. In this book, we are following our main character, who is a very sheltered young woman, and it's kind of weird, her perspective, where you're suspicious of what's going on, or is this some dystopian society future thing, because it picks up and she's living on this little island with her mom, dad, and her little brother, and they're talking about the strangers that live off the island. It feels very dystopian. You don't exactly know what time period this is, what's going on. I thought this book was incredibly boring. It makes sense that not a lot is really happening in this book because the family is very sheltered. They're just living on this island. It's just the four of them. But I did not find the writing of this book to be special enough to make up the difference for how boring the plot was and how little there was going on. Because I don't mind a book where there's nothing going on. But if that's going to be the story, then the writing has to make up the difference. And the writing for this book didn't do it for me. The main character, the girl that we are following, she was very frustrating to me because she's 16, I believe, but she's so extremely sheltered and so incredibly naive and childlike, which totally makes sense. It totally makes sense why she is the way she is, but reading through her eyes and her perspective was very annoying, very frustrating. It felt like I was reading through the eyes of a 6-year-old, and it was just irritating me. There also is a romance that gets introduced into this book that really made me mad as well. It was just, like I said, like I keep saying, it was very annoying. Just not for me. I don't think this book was for me. Some people might like it because it's a tense read. And there is some tense moments where you are uncovering what is really going on, what is happening with this family, why are they on this island, how did they get there? I don't know though, I wasn't hooked. I was very bored, I was very annoyed, and like I said, the writing, I needed more from the writing, and it didn't do it for me, unfortunately. The next book that is one of my least favorite reads from last month is Lord Edgware Dies from Agatha Christie. This is the 9th book in the Hercule Poirot series. And oh my goodness gracious, I feel like I don't remember a thing about this one. There is a woman who is trying to convince Poirot to go speak to her husband because these two, they're married, but they're separated. And the woman really wants to get a divorce from her husband. So because their relationship isn't good, she wants Poirot to go convince her husband to initiate this divorce. For some reason, I could not get into this book. I think it might be the way I read it, and that was I used this as my before bed audiobook, and I do that a lot with my Agatha Christie reads. They are so chill and relaxed and almost boring, and that is kind of what I like about them, is they are kind of boring because they're perfect palette cleansers. They're perfect for when you've read a bunch of really dark reads and you want something just easier, you know? That is Agatha Christie to me. And it's also perfect for a before bed book because it helps me, it lulls me into a state of tiredness and droning and it helps me fall asleep. However, it's also not great because when you're reading a book that way where you fall asleep every night listening to it, I kept getting stuck at 32% into this book because I would fall asleep and it was like impossible for me to break past that 32% in point. I didn't really like this one. I rated this one 2 stars. Yes, I had a hard time getting into it because of how I read it. Like, that was totally my fault. But there are other Agatha Christie's I read in in January that I loved, that I rated 5 stars, and I also read them before bed and I had no issue with them and I loved them. They were fantastic, and I will talk about those in another video. But Lord Edgware Dies, I don't even remember, honestly. Like, I barely remember what this book was about. I don't remember how it ended. It's like a skippable Poirot book, in my opinion. The next one that I want to talk about is, oh my lord, this is a long title. The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning, How to Free Yourself and Your Family from a Lifetime of Clutter by Margareta Magnusson. What this is, the art of Swedish death cleaning, is when you are getting to your later years in life, decluttering your home to prepare your family for when you do die, so they do not have to clean your estate. So basically, it's getting rid of things before you die so your family doesn't have to do it after you die. Or if you're not getting rid of the things, making plans and making notes so your family knows what to do with these things. In the month of January, I read a ton of nonfiction books and a lot of very easy, very short, quick nonfiction books, similar to this, like very quick, easy read, nothing too deep going on, nothing that you haven't already heard before. Like, that's the thing. So I rated this book 3 stars, and there was nothing groundbreaking in this book. A lot of it felt like common sense, but it was nice, it was easy, it was what I needed for the mental headspace that I was in January. The next read is Secret Life of Fungi by 𝚆𝙃 Whitley. I am really interested and fascinated by mushrooms. I love when there is mushroom horror in fiction. And you know what? In the beginning, the first half, I was really hooked, really enjoying this one. It was so soft and quiet and like cottagecore-esque, very relaxing. Especially like the opening chapter of this book. It feels like you're walking through a damp forest after the rain, and they're like explaining everything that you should see, and like you're walking through this forest and you see the mushrooms, and it was just so lovely, so nice. It was the second half of this book that started to lose me because it got into really nitty-gritty details in the later half of this book with like specific kinds of mushrooms. It just got too specific and too sciencey for me, and it really started to bore me. So I only rated this book 3 stars. It's a skippable read, you know, like I'm not gonna highly recommend you guys run out and pick this one up. It wasn't horrible at the same time. It was a 3 star, middle of the road. The next read is The Sunset Years of Agnes Sharp by Leonie Swan. This is definitely something that I would classify as a cozy mystery. We are following a group of older citizens who are living in this like share home together. One of the members of their house dies, and then there's also their neighbor gets murdered. So police come and investigate, and they're trying to figure out who murdered the neighbor, how did this person in their house die, and you know, like, is it all connected, what's going on, blah 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 blah. So there is a dash of murder in here, but overall it's very lighthearted and funny, and for its purpose of being a cozy mystery, I do feel like it served its purpose, but it didn't blow me away. It's not something that I feel like I'm gonna remember a few months from now. It was a nice read for January, but I don't think this is one that's gonna stick with me at all. So I just rated this book 3 stars. The next book I read is How to Calm Your Mind, Finding Presence and Productivity in Anxious Times by Chris Bailey. What is with these nonfiction books with like paragraph long titles? Oh my God. I read a lot of, like I said, I read a lot of nonfiction in January, and a lot of it was sort of books about anxiety and rest and just that sort of topics. I needed help, right? Because I was having a lot of mental health struggles in January and feeling a lot of anxiety, and I was struggling, okay? So this is the type of stuff I needed to read. This book was okay. I felt like it was well researched, it had some good information, but similar to the book I spoke about earlier, a lot of this information was stuff I felt like I already knew. It felt like common sense. And the thing is, with these nonfiction books, I sometimes feel like when you've read one, you've read them all. Now, I don't always mind that they can feel repetitive because sometimes I will still find helpful things in them. Like the majority, 70% of it will be repetitive. It'll be common sense, things I've already heard, and then there'll be like a little grain of something new in there. I don't really feel like any of that sort of info or tips given was really rephrased or re-examined in a new enough or different enough way that like unlocked anything new for me. I appreciated this book for what it was. It was very quick, easy. It helped relax me while reading it, but it didn't do anything huge for me, and it was just a 3-star read. The last book that I'm gonna speak about in this video is Sure I'll Join Your Cult, a memoir of mental illness and the quest to belong anywhere by Maria Bamford. Yes, it was a 4-star. I rated it 4 stars. But there was things I didn't love about it, you know, like maybe for that reason I should lower it to a 3. Let's start with the title of this book, Sure I'll Join Your Cult. That leads me to believe that this book is going to focus on these organizations that prey on vulnerable groups of people with mental illness. And I expected a lot more of a clear through line in this book focusing on that. Now, this is a memoir and it does focus on the narrator's experience, but it doesn't really focus on the premise that I was promised from the title of the book. It focuses on her mental health struggles and taking medication and her relationships and jobs that she's had throughout her life. And I did but I found all of that very interesting. I liked reading about it, and that is why I rated this book 4 stars. But I did expect something a little bit different. Now, the other thing is, maybe this wasn't the best book for me personally to pick up because I am not a person with like a huge sense of humor. It's often hard for me to laugh. It's hard for me to, I'm a very serious person, okay? And Maria Bamford, I didn't know this when I picked it up, but she is a professional comedian. That is her career. And so this book was heavy on the jokes, heavy on the humor. For that reason, I found it very distracting because her narration would ping pong between storytelling and jokes. And I found it really rough to like settle into the narrative and into her storytelling because it felt like it was all over the place. Like she was throwing jokes at me, and there was these parts that I felt like were so unnecessary. And it was the conclusion portion of every chapter of this book where she would go into a recipe. It wasn't like a legitimate like recipe of like how you cook something, but it was a recipe like it was a funny thing. It was all jokes. And that's great. You know, like she should be allowed to tell her story in any way she wants, right? And she's a comedian, so it totally makes sense that this book was humor heavy, joke heavy. But for me, a very serious person who sometimes struggles to find things funny, I definitely struggled with portions of this book. So I think for me, this one just wasn't totally a book for me. But you guys, I still rated this book 4 stars. I still liked it. But out of the 14 books that I read in the month of November, I had a ton. Did I just say the month of November? First we had December, then we had November. We are in the month of January as I am filming this. I am in the month of January, okay? Out of the 14 books that I read in January, I had a ton of 5-star books, okay? And this book does not compare to the other 7 that I'm gonna speak about in another video, okay? So it's falling in the lesser video. That is not to say that I did not like it. That is not to say that I would not recommend it. And that is not to say that it was not a great book. That is all I have to say. As I already shared like 12 times, I'm gonna have another video coming out talking about the other half of my January wrap up. And I had so many 5-star books in January. We are in the month of January, yes. So I'm excited to talk about those. If you guys have any books that you read in January that you would like to share with me in the comments and talk to me about them, let's talk about whatever you read in January. But